It's a pleasure to talk about Zen master, Buddhist icon, Thich Nhat Hanh. I have so much admiration for him and the inspiration that he's brought to me and to so many as a truly great teacher of the heart of the Dharma that is embodied in his presence and brings the gift of awakening close at hand to so many people over these many decades. One of the great gifts that Thich Nhat Hanh has demonstrated is his ability to make the most profound teachings widespread in a simple form. As a monastic, as a poet, as an activist, as an artist, he took the profound teachings of the Buddha and talked about breathe simply, talked about becoming peace, about peace is every step, how you take a step, how you hold a cup of tea, how you greet another person becomes the place of illumination. And in doing that, he really illuminated the Dharma for everyone. And he did it not just in his words and in the beautiful books that he's written, but he also did it with his presence. I remember when on one of the occasions he came to teach at our center, Spirit Rock, in Northern California, and 2,000 or 3,000 people were gathered on a hillside, and we made a stage for him. And on the stage were some of the monks and nuns from the community, and they gave out an apple for everyone to do a mindful eating and taught people how to quiet and follow their breath. So everyone was prepared for Thai's arrival. And then he walked up the road, which you could see in the background beyond this wooden stage, coming up to this amphitheater where the 2,000 or 3,000 people were seated. And he walked so mindfully and slowly and beautifully, elegantly, that the whole 3,000 people took a deep breath and realized, oh, this is what it's like to be present. His presence had a remarkable effect because he was so much embodying the teachings that he also transmitted in his words and his poetry. I met him shortly after he first came to teach at San Francisco Zen Center, maybe almost 40 years ago. And I was part of a retreat as well that he taught down at the Tassajara Monastery. And at that time, the Zen community in many places kind of looked down on mindfulness as a little brother, second-class practice that was somewhat dualistic. If you were really Zen, you were just there, immediate in the moment. And mindfulness was like, oh, sitting around, noticing, observing, talking about, as if it wasn't really deep meditation. And then Thich Nhat Hanh arrived and took a cup of tea and took a step and described what it meant to be truly mindful, which is to be absolutely present in the eternity of this moment. And all of a sudden the community changed and they realized, oh, he's teaching what we have been practicing and what we have loved and aspired to in our Zen practice for so long. He brought these worlds together. And at that time, Richard Baker Roshi, who was the abbot at San Francisco Zen Center, described Thich Nhat Hanh as a cross between a cloud, a snail, because he could be very slow, and a piece of heavy machinery, which I love because it's a description of the emptiness of Thich Nhat Hanh and the fullness and presence at the same time. One of the things that's most inspiring about Thich Nhat Hanh is his ability to take some of the most profound teachings of the Buddha and make them accessible, understandable, and practical for us and for those who listen. So, for example, he talks about karma and causes and conditions, and does so in such a way that he speaks about consciousness having the seeds of anger and joy, of love and hate, of fear and of creativity. And then, as we all know, he goes on to teach, depending which seeds you water, these are the seeds that will grow. Or his teachings about paticca samuppada, the cycle of dependent origination that the Buddha described as the heart of his teachings and the most difficult to penetrate for many. And what Thich Nhat Hanh was able to do in holding up a piece of paper in this very famous example and saying, in this paper is the rain cloud that watered the tree that made it, is the tree, is the soil of that tree, is the logger who cut this down, and the logger's spouse who made lunch for the logger, and the truck driver. And in this piece of paper is all that exists. And he taught the understanding of interdependence in the most direct and simple way that allows each of us to see it in our lives, and that is so critical for the world at this time. We need to understand it with climate change and refugees and epidemics and all of these things. We need, as a humanity, to understand our interdependence. And this is one of the great gifts of Thich Nhat Hanh. At the same time, he carried the combination of Theravada, earliest and most systematic Buddhist teachings from Southeast Asia, from Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and Thailand and Sri Lanka and so forth, wedded together with the Mahayana traditions, especially the traditions of Jittamatra and mind-only schools, the teachings of Vasubandhu and the Avatamsaka. And I love these teachings. I love the Avatamsaka, and I love the profound teachings of mind-only that are also found in the Thai forest tradition where I train. But they contain the most beautiful non-dual teachings, where he will say, as we all have heard, this body is not me. I am life without boundaries. I've never been born, and I have never died. Look at the ocean and sky filled with stars, manifestations of the wondrous true mind. Since before time I have been free. Birth and death are only doors through which we pass. And Thich Nhat Hanh directs us back to the timeless nature of consciousness itself, what my teacher Ajahn Chah called the one who knows, becoming the loving awareness itself that is timeless and unborn. And he does it in a way that allows us not only to see, but to feel deeply that we are a part of everything. So in his most famous poem, Please Call Me by My True Names, when he describes arriving on a spring branch or being a tiny bird with fragile wings, arriving to cry and fear and hope and love, he describes as well in this famous image how I am the 12-year-old girl refugee on a small boat who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am also the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. He demands of us that we see our interconnection with all things and that we contain it all, that we are it all. But he does it in this eloquent, simple, poetic, and elegant way. And this sense of interbeing that he teaches is so practical. I remember being with him the last time I saw him a year or so ago when he was in San Francisco receiving medical treatment and surrounded by a group of his monks and nuns. And after we had our morning meditation together with Thich Nhat Hanh, I was sitting in the kitchen with Sister Chang Kong, his great and wise compadre and companion in this path. And I asked about Deer Park Monastery in Southern California and was told they were just opening a retreat. And I said, well, after Thai's stroke, do many people come to the retreats? And she smiled and she said, oh yes, they are full. 600 people will be arriving. And she went on, that's because Thai has taught us that we are him and he is us. So that we are no longer focused on him as the carrier of the Dharma, but that we inter-are and inter-be. And it's been so deeply woven into the community and into the consciousness of those who followed his teachings, that together people commune and practice knowing that they are Thich Nhat Hanh, wherever his physical body might be, that they are the manifestations of this beautiful Dharma. And it follows with his profound revelation or proclamation that the next Buddha will be the Sangha, that it's not to be found in a particular individual, which was true when the Buddha was dying. He said, I will not give it to one person to carry, it is the community. But in this way, Thai has shown us that who we are is the body of awakening. Like many great teachers, he must have already had a remarkable and amazing spirit when he was very young. He was invited to teach at Princeton and Columbia in the early 1960s. And of course, he founded the School of Youth for Social Services and the Order of Interbeing again in the 1960s. And it was at that time that he met, through Thomas Merton, Martin Luther King, who, as we know, nominated him for the Nobel Prize. So from the very beginning, he carried this extraordinary spirit. And I had an experience being with a small group of teachers that had gathered to study the Dharma together with him. He was teaching about smiling and bringing joy into meditation. And at times I had imagined that this was a little bit lightweight, to sit and to smile, the half smile of the Buddha, when there is so much suffering in the world, hunger and continuing warfare and racism and poverty and all the things that we know. And I thought it was a little bit like pasting a smiley face on top of something deeper that our heart needs to open to if we are to be liberated in this moment and at this time, if we are to open the great heart of compassion. So as he was teaching joy and smiling, I had this strange experience of feeling sadder and more filled with tears and grief than I would have imagined or expected. I couldn't understand it. Was it something in my own history that I was touching, of my own trauma and pain? When I sat next to him at lunch, I asked him quite frankly, I said, Thai, when you were sitting there teaching smiling and joy, I became very sad and felt a lot of grief, but I don't understand. Was it mine or was it yours? And he sat quietly for a moment and then looked back and he said, oh, I have so much grief for what I've seen. That is why I teach joy. And I imagined myself back in the School of Youth for Social Services, where he brought together these idealistic young Vietnamese monks and nuns and students from north and south, from all different parts, showing a way to peace, and then discovering that many of those he'd gathered together were killed during that time. Through their collective work together, they also became the target of both sides who were afraid that they were on the other side. And what it must have been like for him, the tragedy of the continuing warfares in Vietnam and being right in the middle of it as a peacekeeper, bringing young people together and then seeing so many die. He's taken that depth of grief and sadness and turned it into something that is so profoundly life-affirming and bringing of beauty and connection to us all. He also has done it through a kind of unshakable spirit and will. When we were teaching together at UCLA, perhaps 15 years ago, to some thousands of people who'd gathered to hear teachings on Eastern and Western psychology, we were all going to go out and do a walking meditation across the campus in the style of Thai as a group, very mindfully. But at that same time, there was, for those of us who were activists, a very big protest movement against what was happening in Tibet and the repression there, the immolations of monks there, and against what was happening in Burma. It was during the time of the student rebellion against the military dictatorship, and students were being shot and killed, as were monks. So many of us were already part of this and had been wearing black armbands. And I said, Thai, let's distribute black armbands to everyone on this walk, so that when we walk, we can also carry our brothers and sisters in Tibet and Burma. And he meditated quietly for a time and said, no, we will just walk. And in it, it was a kind of steely will and a kind of powerful statement that your presence on this earth is what will bring peace. Not just the Zen statement, when you walk, just walk, but by the power of your inner peace, you become the force that changes everything. Now, it's true, he was human, and so he was also stubborn and at times difficult for people and some of those around him. But his gifts and his blessing are profound and enormous. And he's touched the Buddhist traditions in every part of the world and touched myself and all of the Buddhist teachers that I know, and his deep legacy that we can awaken just where we are. On the last retreat that I saw him before he returned from San Francisco to France, he had been in the medical treatment and was wheeled in on a wheelchair every morning for our shared Zen sitting that I was able to participate in on some days. There was a circle of us, teachers, colleagues, students, caregivers, perhaps 30. In Zen fashion, the bell was rung. We sat silently together. And then at the end of the sitting, Thich Nhat Hanh was in his wheelchair, still unable to speak and only able to move one arm a little bit. He gazed around the room and he made direct eye contact with each person that was there, as if to bid farewell, since he would be leaving and we knew we might not see him again, as if to make this deep connection. Here we are beyond birth and death. And my beloved Dharma partner and wife, Trudy Goodman, wonderful teacher, described it this way. She said, I looked at him and I could see two eyes. One of his eyes was intensely present, acknowledging Jack and Trudy and each of the others in the room, and making this profound heart-to-heart connection. And the other eye was on eternity. And this is the gift that Thich Nhat Hanh has brought to us, to bring together these worlds, the legacy of that which is timeless, and the gift of the preciousness of every moment. We're fortunate to have been blessed by his teachings and to continue to be blessed by his presence in the world that will never die. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this field of teaching.